Winter 1983, Moscow. Before dawn, the city is already awake. A woman named Lena stands in a line that doesn't move so much as it breathes. One step forward, a long exhale, then stillness. Her gloves are thin, the wind is not. Somewhere near the front, a man shouts that the delivery truck came early and left early. Someone laughs the tired laugh of people who no longer waste emotion on surprise. Lena is not here for caviar. She's here for soap. In her pocket is a thick wad of rubles, official money, honest money, the money she earns at a factory that makes parts for machines she'll never see. The rubles feel heavy, comforting, and yet useless, because the city is full of things that exist on paper and disappear in real life. Across town, behind clean glass and a security guard with a stiff jaw, another line forms, shorter, quieter. A different species of waiting. Above the door is a name, written with the calm confidence of a system that never admits weakness, a hard currency shop. Inside, imported cigarettes, real coffee, warm winter boots, colorful toys, and on the shelves gold jewelry, bright, ordinary, almost insulting in its simplicity. A young sailor walks in, smiling too easily. He doesn't carry rubles. He carries a secret. So how did an economy that could build rockets end up hiding its real wealth behind locked doors, paid for with gold, traded in whispers, and counted in foreign currency? Intro, one breath. Tonight, we're going behind the Iron Curtain into the USSR's secret gold economy, how the Soviet system needed real money from the outside world, how gold became a lifeline and a lubricant, and how everyday people, workers, managers, sailors, and officials ended up living in two economies at once. Because this wasn't just about bars and a vault. It was about survival, dignity, and what happens when a country tries to plan everything except human nature. And the echo is still here today, anytime a state says, trust the plan, while quietly needing something it can't print. Now, to understand the gold, you have to understand the problem the Soviets thought they were solving. After revolution and civil war, Russia was battered, poor, and humiliated by its backwardness. The Soviet leadership looked at the old world and saw a brutal truth. Countries that industrialize win. Countries that don't get pushed around. They needed factories, steel, machines, railways, power stations. They needed to turn a peasant empire into an industrial superpower in a single generation. The market looked like chaos to them. Wasteful, unequal, unpredictable. People selling, people cheating, prices jumping. It felt like gambling with the nation's future. Central planning, on the other hand, felt logical, moral even. If you could plan a military operation, why not plan an economy? If you could organize millions of soldiers, why not organize millions of workers? The belief was simple. If the state owned the key industries and directed production, you could avoid the anarchy of markets. You could guarantee jobs. You could set prices low. You could build what mattered, not what was trendy. And for a while, it worked, at least in the ways that mattered to leaders staring at maps. The USSR did build, it did mobilize, it did industrialize at enormous speed and cost. It did defeat Nazi Germany in a war of total destruction. It did put the first satellite in orbit, then the first human. From afar, the system looked powerful. But power has a hidden weakness. It loves big, visible victories and struggles with small, invisible needs. Because the first question planning had to answer wasn't, can we build rockets? It was, can we know enough to run everything? The big idea. In Moscow, inside a place called Gosplan, planners tried to turn the entire Soviet economy into a set of targets. Tons of steel, meters of cloth, tractors, shoes, butter, apartment blocks, and yes, rockets. Factories didn't compete for customers, they competed for quotas. Managers weren't rewarded for profits. Profits weren't the point. They were rewarded for fulfilling the plan, hitting the number,
meeting the target, delivering the required output. Money existed, but it didn't act like money in a normal sense. Prices were set. The state decided what things should cost. Wages were controlled. Many essentials were subsidized. The goal was stability and fairness, at least on paper.
Here's the one metaphor that makes the system click. Central planning was an attempt to run a giant country using one enormous shopping list. The list says how many nails, how many loaves of bread, how many radios, how many winter coats. If the list is perfect, the system looks brilliant. Everyone gets what they need. Nothing is wasted. But if the list is wrong, if tastes change, if a factory breaks the machine, if a harvest fails, if demand spikes, then the entire country feels it. And the list, once printed and approved, doesn't change easily. It's not a living conversation. It's a decree. Now, add one more complication. The Soviet Union didn't just want to provide for its citizens. It wanted to compete with the richest industrial powers on Earth. That meant technology, equipment, and sometimes food imports. And for that, rubles were not enough.
Because outside the USSR, the ruble wasn't trusted. It wasn't freely convertible. You couldn't easily show up in Hamburg or Tokyo and say, "Here's Soviet money, please give me machine tools." To buy things on the world market, the USSR needed hard currency. Dollars, Deutschmarks, pounds, or something the world would accept instantly. And that something was gold. Gold didn't care about ideology. Gold didn't ask whether a factory met its quota. Gold didn't care what a newspaper said. A bar of gold was a quiet passport to the outside world. The human reality. Meet Victor. Victor is a foreman at a factory outside Leningrad. Officially, he is living the socialist dream: steady work, an apartment, pride. Unofficially, he is living in a reality where every day begins with a shortage.
One week, they don't have enough bearings. Another week, they have bearings but no lubricant. Another week, the delivery arrives but the wrong size, wrong type, wrong everything. Victor's job is to hit the quota anyway. So Victor becomes a magician. He trades favors, calls in debts. He sends a guy with cigarettes to a warehouse manager. He borrows parts from another line. He keeps a private stash of materials hidden behind a false wall because tomorrow the plan will demand something impossible again. When the factory fails, the paperwork will blame temporary difficulties. When Victor fails, the consequences are personal. Now meet Irina. Irina is a young mother in Moscow. She knows the choreography of shortages the way other people know bus schedules. She has friends who watch the stores. She listens for rumors like a weather forecast. Meet on Thursday. Shoes came in, but only size 42. Coffee is gone. Again. Her rubles are real. Her time is not. She spends hours hunting basic goods, time that vanishes from her life and her family like a tax nobody admits exists. And then one day, Irina's cousin brings her a miracle, a small foreign perfume bottle. Irina holds it like a fragile jewel, as if it might evaporate under Soviet air. Where did it come from? Not from the plan, from the second economy. The USSR had an official economy. The one in speeches, in newspapers, in posters showing smiling workers. And it had a shadow economy, the one that actually made the system function day to day. Sometimes it was small, a mechanic fixing cars after hours for cash or favors, a nurse arranging better care, a shop clerk holding goods under the counter for the right connection. Sometimes it was industrial, entire networks moving scarce items from where the plant accidentally overproduced to where people desperately needed them. And inside that shadow economy, gold played a strange double role. First, gold was a state tool, exported and sold to get hard currency for the country. Second, gold became a personal store of value, something ordinary people trusted more than promises printed on paper.
If you could get gold jewelry, you weren't just buying decoration, you were buying insurance, a way to bribe, to trade, to escape a bad year. And the state noticed. The Soviet government created special stores, hard currency shops, where you could buy imported goods if you paid with foreign currency or special certificates. Suddenly, the shelves looked normal. Suddenly, there was choice. It was a strange morality play. In the official world, everyone was equal. In the hard currency world, equality ended at the register. You could have a Soviet engineer with medals on his chest who couldn't buy decent boots with his salary, and the sailor who spent the week abroad bringing back dollars, walking into the special shop like a king. This is where a young sailor from the cold open comes in.
His name is Sasha. He works on ships that travel outside the Soviet bloc. He sees supermarkets where fruit is piled like it's cheap. He sees streets lit with advertisements, ridiculous and bright. Sasha learns quickly. Abroad, his rubles mean nothing, but his access means everything. So Sasha does what people always do when two worlds touch. He arbitrages. He buys jeans, cigarettes, cassette tapes. He brings them back. He sells to friends of friends, to people who pretend they're above it while handing over cash. Sometimes he's careful, sometimes he's reckless. Because Sasha is not just trading goods, he's trading symbols. In a system that promises abundance someday, a pair of Levi's is not just clothing, it's proof that someday exists elsewhere right now. And when Sasha gets paid, he doesn't always want rubles.
He wants something harder. He wants dollars. He wants gold. Now, above these people, Victor, Irina, Sasha, there are others who live in a different kind of reality. Meet Colonel Morozov. Morozov works in a world of closed files and quiet meetings. He hears the same speeches everyone hears, but he also reads the internal reports. He knows how much grain had to be imported this year. He knows how much technology the USSR needs from abroad. He knows how expensive it is to keep parity with the United States in weapons and space. He also knows the dirty secret. Despite all the talk of self-sufficiency, the Soviet system has foreign dependencies.
When the USSR wants advanced machine tools, chemical equipment, or specialized electronics, it often has to pay in hard currency. When it wants to smooth over a bad harvest, it has to import grain. When it wants to keep up in an arms race, it burns resources that could have gone into consumer goods. So Morozov watches the hard currency numbers like a doctor watching blood pressure. And when the numbers look bad, one word appears in memos like a prayer and a threat: gold. The Soviet Union mined gold, lots of it. Some came from remote regions, harsh climates, immense effort. The details could be heroic or horrifying, depending on where you stood and who was doing the digging. But for the planners in Moscow, the moral complexity collapses into a line on a page. Ounces, tons, reserves. Gold becomes a lever.
Sell gold, get dollars. Get dollars, buy what the plan can't produce. Use what you buy to keep the system stable enough to keep going. And for decades, that lever mattered, because while the USSR could produce tanks and turbines, it often struggled with quality, variety, and innovation in consumer goods. It could flood the country with shoes in the plan and still have shoes that fell apart. The incentives pushed factories toward hitting quantity targets, sometimes at the expense of quality. If the plan demanded 1 million pairs of shoes, the manager's career depended on the count, not whether those shoes fit human feet or survived a winter. So people learned to cope. You learned which store got the good stuff. You learned which clerk to befriend. You learned which friend had a cousin in distribution. You learned quietly to stop believing that the official economy was the whole economy. And then the ultimate irony: the state itself institutionalized the contradiction. Hard currency shops became a way for the state to pull foreign money out of its own citizens and turn it into state-controlled hard currency. You could call it clever. You could call it desperation. But you definitely couldn't call it one economy. Because once a system admits, even indirectly, that rubles aren't enough, the spell breaks. The breaking point. For a time, the USSR could postpone consequences. In the 1970s, energy exports, especially oil and gas, brought in hard currency. It was a cushion, a lucky windfall that made the whole structure feel more stable than it really was. But the structure still had the same problem: information and incentives. The plan couldn't fully know what millions of consumers wanted in real time. It didn't receive clean signals when goods were bad or when demand changed, because shelves were empty regardless. You couldn't vote with your wallet if there was nothing to buy. And managers learned to protect themselves. If you failed the plan, you were punished. If you succeeded, you were given a bigger plan next year. Success could be a trap. So factories exaggerated needs, hoarded inputs, and played games with statistics. The system became a theater where everyone performed the loyalty to targets they privately knew were distorted. Over time, the economy slowed. Not in one dramatic crash at first, more like a long fatigue. Innovation lagged. Productivity growth weakened. The easiest gains, building more factories, mobilizing more labor, had already happened. What remained was harder: efficiency, flexibility, consumer satisfaction, high-tech adaptation. Then pressure stacked up. An expensive arms competition with the United States. A war in Afghanistan, draining resources and morale. A technological gap that was difficult to close when your system struggled to reward experimentation. And then, crucially, the hard currency situation worsened. When oil prices fell in the 1980s, the cushion thinned. External debt mattered more. Imports became harder to finance. Suddenly, the Soviet leadership faced a brutal chain reaction that was easy to describe and hard to stop. Less hard currency meant fewer imports. Fewer imports meant shortages got worse, especially for things the USSR couldn't quickly substitute. Worse shortages meant more pressure on the shadow economy, more corruption, more public cynicism. More cynicism meant less faith in the system's promises, which made reforms riskier and social control harder. And in the middle of that, reform attempts arrived like surgery without a full diagnosis. Under Gorbachev, the USSR tried to change. More openness, some restructuring, attempts to loosen parts of the economy while keeping the core. But partial reforms can be unstable. When you loosen controls without creating stable new incentives and supply chains, you can get the worst of both worlds: old production habits with new uncertainty. Enterprises got more freedom, but the system still lacked clear price signals, reliable markets, and enforceable contracts. Old channels broke before new ones worked. Shortages didn't vanish, they mutated. And hard currency remained the haunting constraint. This is where gold returns to center stage. When times got tight, selling gold was one of the few reliable ways to get hard currency quickly. It was the emergency reserve, the national pawnshop ticket. But selling reserve assets is not a growth strategy. It's a bridge. You don't want to live on the bridge. As the strains multiplied, the leadership faced a painful choice. If you keep spending on military competition and geopolitical commitments, you starve consumer goods and legitimacy. If you reduce those commitments, you risk losing status, influence, and internal confidence. If you try to buy legitimacy with more consumer goods, you need imports. And imports need hard currency. Hard currency needs exports the world wants. And if your main exports are raw materials, then your life becomes tied to global commodity prices you don't control. That's the logic trap. The longer it lasted, the more the USSR depended on money and resources that behaved like weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes disastrous. And when the storm came, you could feel it at the ground level. Victor's factory gets even more erratic supplies. Irina's queues get longer. Sasha's smuggling network gets riskier because demand becomes desperate and policing becomes harsher. Morozov sees the memos: reserves falling, pressure rising, cracks widening. At some point, it becomes less about economics and more about belief. Because every system runs on compliance, and compliance runs on a story. And the Soviet story, guaranteed progress, rational planning, inevitable abundance, was colliding with the lived story of empty shelves and locked shops full of imported goods. The contradiction wasn't just visible, It was humiliating. The verdict. Here's the nuanced truth. The Soviet Union was not a cartoon. It did real things exceptionally well. It could mobilize resources for gigantic projects. It built heavy industry at scale. It achieved mass literacy and trained armies of engineers and scientists. It defeated a genocidal invasion and rebuilt. It accomplished feats in space that reshaped human history. But the same structure that made it powerful in emergencies made it brittle in daily life. Central planning could prioritize big targets, but it struggled to adapt to millions of small preferences and constant changes. It could force production, but it couldn't easily produce honest feedback. It could guarantee work, but it often failed to reward truth-telling and innovation. And because rubles didn't operate as a fully trusted bridge to the outside world, the country's relationship with the global economy became awkward and costly. Hard currency became a permanent concern, something the state chased through oil, through exports, through deals, and through gold. Gold was the quiet confession. A socialist superpower still needed the world's oldest capitalist asset to buy what it couldn't produce and to patch what it couldn't admit. And the second economy was another confession. Even under intense control, people invent markets the way water finds cracks, not because they're greedy villains, but because they have needs, ambitions, families, and a basic desire to trade their effort for a better life. So the lesson isn't planning is evil or Soviets were stupid. The lesson is harsher and more useful. If you remove flexible signals and real incentives from an economy, you don't remove human behavior, you just drive it underground. And when you run two economies at once, one official, one real, the official one eventually loses the argument. Outro. The secret gold economy behind the Iron Curtain wasn't just about glitter and vaults. It was about a system trying to build a future with numbers, while people lived in the present with empty hands. Because in the end, the question wasn't whether the USSR had gold. It was whether it could build an economy where ordinary money meant ordinary life. If you want more stories like this, where history isn't just dates, but choices, trade-offs, and consequences, subscribe and tell me what economy you want to go behind next. And remember this one line: an empire can reach space and still run out of soap.